There he goes. A jump. And dead. If you ask me, the dismount was shaky.
With the runaway success of Tomb Raider, it was only natural that a sequel would be in the works almost immediately. In fact, said sequel was already being conceptualized during development of the original. Of course, with Eidos being the greedy, impatient publisher that they were, Core wasn't going to be given the same amount of development time they had with the first one. No, they had to have something out the door by the 1997 holiday season come hell or high water. And with series creator Toby Gard off to spend the next 7 years working on the eventual Xbox exclusive flop Galleon, it was up to the rest of the original team to cobble together a follow-up to one of 1996's biggest hits in less than a year. I'm sure this will in no way become a trend that leads to many at Core Design coming to resent the entire Tomb Raider franchise.
God damn it, I hate you.
To their credit, and likely what damned them to a hell of yearly Tomb Raider releases like it was a sports game, they pulled it off. And in late 97, Tomb Raider 2, starring Lara Croft, was released a critical and commercial success, cementing Lara as one of the PlayStation's heavy hitters. There were also PC and Mac versions, but let's not kid ourselves here. When people think of classic Tomb Raider, they think of the PS1. Though we'll be using the version of Tomb Raider 2 from Aspyr's Remastered collection for this video. If you're new here, first of all, hi, I'm Swanee the Mike, or just Mike, or Swanee if you're feeling saucy. And this is the second part of my combined look at the original Tomb Raider trilogy and the Tomb Raider 1, 2, and 3 Remastered collection. If you'd like to start at the beginning, a link to the first part should have appeared in the upper right by now if future me did his job correctly. Lara's sophomore adventure takes her to the Great Wall of China in search of the Dagger of Jean, an artifact said to grant its wielder the power of a dragon. Ooh, does that mean if Lara finds it, she can tap into the glow?
Playtime's over, boy.
We'll have to wait a bit before getting an answer to that question though, because it turns out that Lara isn't the only one who wants to get their hands on the dagger. After surviving an ambush, Lara learns from her attacker that mafioso/cult leader/all-around lunatic Marco Bartoli is already a step ahead of her in searching for a way to unlock the door guarding their prize. But before she can pry any more information out of Bartoli's foot soldier, he kills himself with poison. One of only a handful of men in Tomb Raider 2 who don't die by Lara's hand. With no other leads to speak of and her murder boner growing harder by the minute, Lara heads off to Venice, Bartoli's home turf. Thus begins the meat of Tomb Raider 2, as you chase Marco Bartoli and his fanatically devoted minions to the ends of the earth. With roughly a year of development time, it only makes sense that the Tomb Raider 2 team would opt to iterate on what they already had rather than start from scratch. Meaning that, fundamentally, this is the same game as before rather than a brand new experience. However, that's not to say that Tomb Raider 2 possesses no new features of its own. For one, this is where the extremely handy mid-air somersault was added to the series, eventually being officially backported to Tomb Raider 1 with the Remastered collection. Lara can also climb ladders and certain walls now, though since it uses the same animation for both, the ladder climbing looks a wee bit weird. But I suppose not all of us can scale a ladder quite like Shelton Benjamin. But the biggest change, and the one that would come to redefine the entire Tomb Raider franchise for better or worse, is the massive increase in combat encounters. Where the first Tomb Raider put the platforming front and center while deliberately avoiding putting human enemies in Lara's way outside of boss battles, Tomb Raider 2 is the origin point for all of the memes about Lara Croft being a bloodthirsty one-woman army. I believe I'd read before that the final body count is somewhere around 400. Though that count could have also included the wildlife and cryptids you'll have to gun down as well. Either way, from this point on, Tomb Raider morphed from a platformer with some combat to spice up the gameplay, to the prototypical action-adventure series where combat and platforming are balanced at a near 1-to-1 ratio. As a huge fan of first-person shooters, you'd think I'd be ecstatic for this sort of change, and yet all the increased combat did for me was expose the weaknesses of Tomb Raider's gunplay. In the first game, you had to keep moving to avoid the mostly melee range enemies in a tense, slightly jank, tango of death. The limited fights against ranged enemies there were already on the weak side, but tolerable due to their rarity. You didn't have enough time to be irritated by it before it was back to the fun stuff. Now you auto-aim your way through hordes of gun-toting madmen with brain-dead AI whose own aim is foiled by Lara constantly jumping left and right, and whose best strategy is to run straight towards you. What the developers clearly envisioned as a John Woo-style ballet of bullets feels far more static. Several times my reaction to being attacked was,
Again with the arms dealers?
rather than any sort of excitement for more combat. This goes from exasperated annoyance to full-on misery in the underwater sections. Yes, after all of the zero demand for it, swimming sequences are even more nerve-wracking with the addition of underwater combat, and not in a good way. All you have to defend yourself with is a slow-firing spear gun as likely to miss by a mile as it is to hit its target. Normally, this would be entirely on me and my inability to lead a target no matter what game I play. Remember though that we're working with auto-aim here. I can't lead my targets because I'm not the one aiming. It's here, even more so than in the first game's remaster, that the modern controls are a godsend with swimming. Not having to fight with the submarine controls while defending myself against the divers and sharks looking to kill me takes this back down to a manageable level of irritating. I still don't exactly like underwater combat in Tomb Raider 2, or really any Tomb Raider that has it, but I can push through it without snapping my controller in blind fury. Aside from the spear gun, Lara's weaponry has seen a couple other additions as well as one extremely marginal change. The latter being that the dual magnums were swapped out for the automatic pistols. Functionally, they're the exact same weapon. A stronger version of Lara's infinite ammo pistols, with the sole trade-off being that they actually have limited ammo. All that separates Tomb Raider 1's magnums from Tomb Raider 2's auto pistols are the names, a slight visual change, and the auto pistols don't sound quite as powerful as the magnums. Which does make them a little less satisfying for me to use, even if they're about equal in stopping power with the magnums. Meanwhile, the two brand new weapons come with their own little interesting mechanic to balance out their sheer strength.
First blood. Killing spree. Dominating.
To use either the M16 or the grenade launcher, Lara has to steady her aim first. This means that you can't be running or jumping all around the place.
Humiliating defeat.
The M16 has one of the strongest damage outputs in the game, with a fire rate only eclipsed by the Uzis. If you can get the drop on a group of enemies or have a bunch running at you from a single direction, the M16 is your best friend. As for the grenade launcher, well, I don't know why they call it a grenade launcher when it fires in a straight line towards its target like a rocket launcher.
Why do we call these masks, by the way? This is a helmet, not a mask.
Beyond that bit of confusion, this is the game's rocket launcher. A weapon with extremely limited ammo drops that'll take down all but the toughest of enemies in one shot. Take it from me, you'll want to save as many grenades as possible for the final level. The first time I beat this game, I had next to no grenades. That was a fun time.
Had to fight fire demons, overcome army of vampire goats, but I got it!
Speaking of fun, the exploration, platforming, and puzzle solving continue to be the parts that I have the most fun with. Not a great deal has been changed here. Jumps are a bit trickier, insta-kill traps are more frequent, the usual tricks to trip up veteran players. But with how rock solid this aspect was in the original game, it didn't need much fine-tuning if you ask me. The only noteworthy change is the addition of drivable vehicles, a speedboat in Venice and an ATV in Tibet. To my utter shock the first time I played Tomb Raider, these vehicles actually control well. We're not looking at a possible Tomb Racer game here, though I'm kinda surprised that Eidos didn't have a Lara Croft kart racer made now that I think about it. But these vehicles actually handle decently enough that I'm not constantly swearing at my screen every time I have to drive one. And considering that many action games, even a whole generation later, struggled to have vehicle sections that weren't the drizzling shits, this is a victory for the Tomb Raider 2 team. Moving on to the level design, it was a risky move to set so much of the game away from ancient ruins and tombs. The canals of Venice, oil rigs, and sunken cruise ships aren't exactly what you'd expect to be traversing in a game called Tomb Raider. But it doesn't stop these from being engaging, well-designed levels that manage to capture a similar sense of wonder to exploring long-lost ruins. Well, maybe not the oil rig, but then you get to 40 fathoms, and even if the combat here sucks, the actual exploration on your way to the Maria Doria is enjoyable. If I had to pick the section that immediately comes to mind when I think of Tomb Raider 2, it's either here or that hell march of a final level. But there's a few more things I should talk about before we get into spoiler territory. First of all, it's here in Tomb Raider 2 that a certain issue with the remaster's modern control scheme rears its ugly head. With the sequel including many more cinematic moments that wrest camera control away from you, you'll start to notice a frustrating quirk of the modern scheme's 360-degree movement at these times. Sometimes Lara won't run in any direction aside from forward if you don't let go of the stick for a moment after the camera changes. Most of the time, this is a minor irritant, but then there's times like this endgame boulder chase. No matter how many times I tried, I couldn't manage to survive this trap without glitching it. Briefly switching to tank controls made it a breeze, of course, but I shouldn't have to do that in the first place. More to the point, I actually recorded this footage back in April as I'd initially planned on doing these videos closer together, so just to be safe, I went back to check to see if this was still a problem. Yep, still an active issue yet to be addressed. The rest of the package is more than enough to make up for this in my opinion, but this issue really does spoil all of the fancy new camera angles that were added by Core to Tomb Raider 2. Those new camera angles aren't the only improvement to the presentation either. To start with, this is the game that gave Lara her iconic ponytail and it's surprisingly good physics for a PS1 game. Sometimes I forget that 5th generation systems were capable of these little touches. Lara's model has seen a facelift in general, but more importantly, Lara now mixes up her outfit depending on the level, from her iconic teal tank top and khaki shorts, to a surprisingly conservative wetsuit, to the pretty badass addition of a bomber jacket to her classic look, to the start of her best Croft Manor training gear. And of course, I would never hear the end of it if I failed to mention the playable epilogue's bathrobe. Which, I mean, just because I try to avoid turning into a drooling idiot about it doesn't mean I'm incapable of appreciating this as a straight guy. A woman defending her home single-handedly from an army of intruders while wearing nothing but a bathrobe is like the perfect fusion of badass and sexy.
This is my racing fracking land, and I don't care what no man from no Tennessee Valley Authority says concern it.
Plus, it's fan service without taking away from Lara as a character, which is something that I think got forgotten over time as both Eidos's marketing and gaming media of the time zeroed in on Lara as a sex symbol.
My secret is Dreamcast. I tried it, and I've never looked so good. Wanna know how it works?
Oh my god! What's wrong with your face?
In the classic games, Lara Croft isn't a vapid pinup girl with a come-hither grin. She's a ruthless, thrill-seeking anti-heroine whose heroic status is down entirely to her enemies being far worse than her.
Can you dig it?
That softer image of her as nothing but fap material comes primarily from magazines, commercials, and promotional renders.
Kick out the jams, beaver squeezers, and say hello to the new Ms. PC Beach.
Damn!
Damn!
If you ask me, Crystal Dynamics were the ones who really pushed the fan service over the top with their initial Tomb Raider offerings, only to then overcorrect with the reboot by replacing gratuitous fan service with gratuitous bodily harm to Lara that has her surviving so many injuries that I have to assume she's secretly related to Wile E. Coyote. But like always, I've gone off on a tangent and lost the plot. The other significant update to the visuals in Tomb Raider 2 is with its swanky new lighting system that enables more realistic light sources to be rendered in real time. To show this off, Lara can now use disposable flares to light her way through dark areas. In what is probably a side effect of screens being better lit these days than in the late 90s, I rarely encountered areas dark enough with the original visuals that I actually needed these flares at all. Nonetheless, it's an admirable early step in the kind of lighting effects which we take for granted these days. On the audio half of the presentation, with Nathan McCree back in the saddle for the sound design, it's roughly even with the original. Tomb Raider 2 continues the trend of using ambient noise to immerse the player instead of an intricate musical score all throughout. Music is used sparingly, either to set the mood before fading into the background, or more often to accompany combat. With how much more frequently you'll be fighting in 2, it winds up making the silence feel comforting as it becomes a sign that you can relax again. Of course, this excellent design also means that it's going to be a pain to properly use the soundtrack in the background of my video again, but that's a future me problem. On to the story. Personally, I prefer Marco Bartoli's recurring presence in the story compared to Jacqueline Notla lurking in the background of Tomb Raider 1. He's no less a two-dimensional video game bad guy, but having moments like him taking out the monk that Lara was speaking to make Bartoli feel like a clear threat throughout the game without needing a gonzo supernatural reveal to put him on Lara's level. Not that we don't still go in a really bizarre supernatural direction right at the end again. Spoilers from here on out, obviously. If you want to avoid them nasty spoils, do the old skippy skip ahead to this point here. I skipped over discussing the finale of the original Tomb Raider in part because I felt that everyone and their mother knows what happened, but also because of how Atlantean meat monsters can't compare to the wacky-ass concept that is mafia cult using ancient Tibetan blood magic to turn their leader into a fucking dragon.
Wow, that hardly ever happens.
The final section takes you to one of the strangest levels in the series, a chain of mystical floating islands you have to navigate while fending off waves of flying magic statues. This isn't a slow easing into the supernatural like in the first game, where you had the odd encounter with one of the aforementioned Atlantean meat monsters well before heading to Atlantis proper. This shit just happens. One minute you're fighting your way through a normal temple, the next you're on an island high above the clouds and fighting the Great Value equivalent to the Terracotta Army. Then once you've finally made it through that gauntlet of nigh endless combat and platforming hell...
Fuck you, I'm a dragon!
Well, he's an Eastern-style dragon, so there's a chance he doesn't... Nope, fire breath confirmed! Thankfully, Bartoli decided to turn into a dragon in the one room with pools of water to dive into. Gotta appreciate a boss who plays fair like that. There isn't a complicated strategy here aside from stay away from his fire breath at all costs. Pump him full of lead, and eventually he'll roll over long enough for you to rip the dagger out of his dragon tummy. Congrats, you've beaten Tomb Raider 2! Or have you? I suppose that would be more of a surprise if I hadn't mentioned it while talking about Lara's outfits. But I do think it's cool to give the player a victory lap level of sorts. You fend off the last of Bartoli's mobsters looking for vengeance for their boss, and once you do, you're treated to a cutscene that hits a little different knowing how much core staff would grow to resent working on this series.
Don't you think you've seen enough?
Just like with the first game, the Remastered collection includes Tomb Raider 2's PC and Mac exclusive expansion pack, Golden Mask. This time though, they bothered to make new assets and textures, which already puts Golden Mask on better footing than Unfinished Business. Golden Mask sees Lara head off to the fictional Melnikov Island in search of an Inuit artifact called the, I am totally gonna botch this, the Mask of Tornarsuk. Considering the name of the island, combined with the lack of actual cutscenes and how quickly the loading screen that shows it's part of the Aleutians disappears, I didn't initially realize that this was supposed to be part of Alaska. I saw all the abandoned Soviet buildings and machinery and assumed that this took place on the Russian side of the Bering Sea. Yeah, it's an Inuit artifact she's looking for and all, but Inuit is all too often misused as a catch-all term for people native to the Arctic. Not to mention that Tomb Raider doesn't exactly have the best track record with its treatment of indigenous peoples. That's gonna be a fun conversation when I get to the South Pacific part of Tomb Raider 3. Besides that kerfuffle, abandoned and rotting Soviet installations in a frigid locale isolated from the rest of the world. Anyone else think someone at Crystal Dynamics took one look at this expansion and realized what they wanted to do with Rise of the Tomb Raider?
Siberia it is then.
Golden Mask feels much closer to a proper expansion in terms of design than Unfinished Business did. While it may not add any new features, the 4 levels presented here all flow together and are built like proper Tomb Raider levels. Even if the levels may not reach the heights of the best the base game had to offer, a steady line of good but not great levels is a good enough improvement for me after suffering through Unfinished Business. Once again though, the lack of any sort of clear story really demonstrates how even the excuse plots of most of the classic Tomb Raider titles need to be present to give the player something to latch onto. I've got no solid idea of what's going on or why besides needing to find the titular Golden Mask. I'm given no clear explanation as to who this group I'm fighting are or why they want the mask for themselves. And after a really disappointing final boss that's just a reskin of a boss you fight in the base game, it jumps straight to credits exactly like Unfinished Business did.
Well, at least it didn't end like The Sopranos, where it just cut to black in mid-sentence.
Golden Mask comes close to being worth it for anyone besides hardcore fans who just want more Tomb Raider 2. Unfortunately, the lack of a real narrative to form that connective tissue keeps this pack of 4 levels from being all it could be. What do you mean 5 levels? I played through the whole thing and there were only... I have to find all the secrets, don't I?
3 hours later.
Surprisingly worth it. I was expecting a level that was either comically difficult or one done as a joke, not this strange yet compelling level that sees you running around a chintzy Vegas hotel, also known as every Vegas hotel, with trippy visuals like these literal cell blocks and fighting a combo of Bartoli's henchmen, the thugs from the rest of Golden Mask, 2 T-Rexes, and apparently another round with the final boss of Golden Mask, but I can't show it because the level glitched out and didn't spawn it in. The lone drawback in an extremely creative level that seems to exist entirely for the sake of fun. Aspyr even went to the length of giving Lara a new outfit for the remaster visuals. As a fan of tacky clothing, I absolutely adore the cheetah print outfit here. My only complaint is the heels. Call me an old man, but all I can think whenever an action game puts its heroine in stiletto heels is how she manages to do all of that without snapping an ankle. Get that woman some flat shoes, damn it! That aside, like I said, A+ cheeseball outfit, no other notes. Perfect for a secret level that's heavily implied to be a dream sequence. Okay, I'm done this time, right? No double secret probation level that I missed? Because I'm not playing through it a third time, and if you think you can make me, then you can just... For a game made on such a time crunch, it's impressive that Core managed to pull together such a well-honed final product with Tomb Raider 2. I may not be a fan of the seismic shift towards the action side of action-adventure and all the combat that entailed, but that doesn't change the fact that this is still a great game with enough improvements to keep it from being the cheap rehash of Tomb Raider 1 that it easily could have been. Even the expansion pack, while nothing earth-shattering, is a noticeable improvement over the first game's expansion. And as for its remaster, the only significant issue I have is with the modern control scheme bugging out during those cinematic camera moments. Otherwise, it stands with Tomb Raider 1's remaster as the best available version of Tomb Raider 2. And that makes it 2 for 3 so far in Aspyr's remasters hitting their mark. Now the question becomes, did they manage to bat for 1,000 on this remastered collection and deliver on the somewhat contentious Tomb Raider 3 as well? Will I get around to answering that question sooner than I did in getting around to Tomb Raider 2? Find out next time on Swanee the Mike. Except not really, because the next game we'll be looking at is 2007's The Darkness.
Through you, I am born.
Town, or maybe I'll kick your fat ass.
That's all you get, morons. Now go to hell.